Now, to start the program, I would like to invite our colleague Leonidas Donskis, member of the European Parliament, who represents the Committee on Development, to take the floor. And Mr. Donskis is also the coordinator of his political group, ALDE, in the Subcommittee on Human Rights. So, Mr. Donskis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Words cannot describe how delighted and grateful I am for offering this topic, which is extremely important. Concerning reactive diplomacy vis-à-vis preventive diplomacy, needless to say, we cannot afford our tardiness and our late reactions to the most vicious political acts of violence and human rights violations. And needless to say, when we try to study closely what happened in societies or countries that suffered very massive human rights abuses or massive atrocities or criminal actions and crimes against humanity, what is obvious is that everything starts from small doses or very early stages, and we have to pay very close attention to those things. I do believe that had we reacted properly and swiftly to what happened in those early stages in Chechnya, Darfur, or Rwanda, we would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. We would have saved many innocent people. But the point is that the countries that possess enormous political and economic powers and instruments, they did react much too late. When I talk about some possibilities to react instead of trying just to lecture the most vicious and cynical regimes that systematically and methodically abuse human rights, I keep in mind the following. We know that we have to study very closely the cases of hate speech, the spread of hatred, the spread of hate speeches. Each time when we study or we have to do with demonization or attempts to single out a nation, a religion, a group as an alleged source of evil, we have to be very attentive. We have to do about that. Because everything starts with demonization of a group. Everything ends up in mass violence. The same applies to some hate speeches or the spread of hatred education or hatred literature. Each time when we know that the protocols of the Elders of Zion or similar rubbish of 19th and 20th century hate literature and hate fiction is still on high demand, we have to react. Because we know that every single act of genocide, every genocidal practice starts with demonization of a certain nation, a certain ethnic group, or a certain religion. That's why I do believe that we cannot allow ourselves to be reluctant, to be complacent. And Madam Chair, you mentioned many times that we have to mainstream human rights into the most important, not to say the major criteria of the political reliance of states and countries. And I couldn't agree more on this. I do believe that we have to prevent genocidal practices and mass atrocities precisely by mainstreaming human rights as a major concern, as a major criterion which tells almost everything about the degree of reliability and credibility of every single country, every single political system. And my last point would be that from the point of view of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, well, it is, I think, too obvious to need any sort of emphasis if we react too late. If mass atrocities or crimes against humanity happened, how on earth can we hope for stabilization of some fragile and vulnerable societies? So no methodology works if we cannot prevent mass atrocities or crimes against humanity. We try to stabilize some countries, we try to help them, but if we cannot prevent some intergroup or inter-ethnic violence and hatred, so then again we fail. It's a failure because then it would take some decades to restore the state of affairs, which we regarded as not satisfactory. And yet we lost that. That's why I think it is critical for us to study the media. And I would propose that in addition to our effort to mainstream human rights as one of the major criteria in evaluating the states and the political regimes, we should study the media very closely. Each time we have the reports from the academic world, from the academe, or from people who study the media, each time we have the reports which indicate demonization of certain groups, peoples, ethnicities, religions, we have to react. Because this is nothing but just the introduction. This is the overture to possible genocidal practices. And we have to do it very closely, and I do believe that the Human Rights Subcommittee and DEVE, working together and trying to achieve these goals, can use the most efficient instruments of the European Parliament and the European Union. And my very last example would be that it does work. Because each time when I see some diplomats of the countries that have very bad human rights record, when they start, doing something, just trying to appeal to us and trying to affect our opinion, I realize that it works. It's important. Our resolutions, our documents. So the work we do, it is very important, it works, and I wouldn't agree with people who would suggest that they don't react. They do. They do. That's why we have to do our work, and I would urge our committee to do something to strengthen this dimension which I mentioned, meaning the analysis of the media, the analysis of education based on hatred. Hatred education, hate speech, hate literature. We have to study those things very closely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.